Dependency injection is basically a shift of responsibilities, a shift from developers manually building every object in the system to a framework that understands those relationships and assembles them for you. And once you really understand and internalize that shift, a huge part of Spring suddenly starts making sense. So before we dive into any terminology or diagrams, let me start with something very practical, something very visual. On the left side of my screen, you are looking at a controller that tries to construct the entire application inside itself, all the services, all the repositories, and basically everything. And on the right side, you are seeing a controller with the exact same dependencies and responsibilities, but it actually doesn't create a single object. There is not a single constructor invocation. Now, let me actually start with the left hand side with the dirty example. In this version, the constructor manually creates 9 repositories, which happen to be the dependencies of the 3 services this controller needs. And then using those 9 repositories, it finally constructs those 3 services. And technically speaking, this works just fine, but the controller is doing everything but the main thing a controller is supposed to be doing, that is receiving an HTTP request, delegating it to a service, and then returning an HTTP response. And instead, it constructs repositories, constructs services, and wires everything manually. So basically, it's not just busy, it is essentially overloaded. Now, let me move to the clean example where we make use of Spring's dependency injection feature. Here we have the same controller class, same configuration, same dependencies, but the important difference is that there is absolutely no manual object construction. This controller simply declares 3 service dependencies and Spring supplies them. So now the natural question becomes, where do these objects come from if the controller no longer creates them? And that is the point we need to understand concepts like dependency injection and maybe inversion of control. And to be able to make these abstract concepts as tangible as possible, as approachable as possible, we need to step away from code for a moment and take a brief look at a simplified diagram. All right, here is the whole thing in one picture. And don't worry, I'm not going to walk through every tiny box. I just want you to notice the overall shape. At the very bottom, you will see 9 small boxes. And these are all of our repositories that we have seen in the initial example. They are placed at the bottom because they don't depend on anything else. They are the simplest building blocks in the context of Spring Boot development. And right above them, you will see our 3 services, and each of them is connected upward into the controller and downward into the repositories it needs. And here, nothing surprising either, because more often than not, this is going to be the flow you're going to work with as a Spring developer. Services depend on repositories and controllers depend on services. But the important part is actually on the right side of this diagram, that vertical box labeled Spring container. And that's the part we have been missing in our first example at the start of the video. Because here is what the diagram is communicating. You don't build this object graph yourself. You just describe your components and their dependencies, and Spring handles them for you, the underlying infrastructure. And that is the entire idea behind dependency injection and inversion of control. You stop constructing and you start declaring. That is essentially all it is. Here I have opened up a couple of the repository classes, and what I want you to notice is that all these repositories follow the exact same pattern. Each one is just a simple class annotated with the component annotation, and there is no wiring, there is no construction, there is no ni keyword. And Spring creates these objects automatically before anything else. Now let's go up one level. Here I have 2 services we need in the dashboard controller. And again, realize that each of these services declares 3 repository dependencies, but there is no construction. There are just clean constructor parameters. And Spring, by those parameters, inspects these dependencies and wires them in so that the architecture, the system stay consistent. A service declares what it needs, but it does not create them. Now, if we finally come back to the controller, here we have the exact same pattern. The controller simply says, I need an event service, I need a ticket service, I need a venue service, and nothing else. No wiring logic, no manual construction. Everything else is all handled by Spring. And this is the whole purpose of dependency injection. That is to eliminate manual wiring from your code base. Last but not least, let me quickly show you one beginner mistake. At least that's something that I committed a lot. Now, if you, for example, go to the event service and make the ticket service, or let's say venue service, a dependency of the service, and we are going to have to recreate the all arguments constructor. And likewise, if we go to the venue service, and I'm going to open them side by side so that you can see them both. If I declare the event service as one of the dependencies of this venue service, and again, we are going to recreate the all arguments constructor. What you need to realize here is that there is no valid starting point. Even without Spring, this construction order is impossible because the event service requires venue service to be created, and the venue service requires event service to be created. And if you run this application, if you try to run this application, what you are going to see is that if I make this more readable, it is going to warn you about that the application failed to start, and that is because you have a circular dependency, and circular references, circular dependencies are prohibited by default. And this is the key idea. Dependency injection is not magic. It follows the logical sequential construction rules. If your dependencies form a loop, the framework cannot get your components ready for you. And in a way, that is actually very good because it is telling you you created a dependency graph that cannot logically exist. And dependency injection only works when the architecture itself makes sense. So, what you need to realize is that the framework itself is not going to fix design issues on your behalf. If we were to sum it up, I think the main takeaway from this video should be that dependency injection is not complicated per se, it is just a shift in responsibility. Instead of asking, how do I create this object? You, as a Java developer, as a Spring developer, start asking, what does this object depend on? And Spring takes care of the wiring and replaces manual object construction with a consistent and a predictable and a automatic process inside this Spring container.